Hello everyone, welcome back to the Red Team training series. In this video, we're going to be taking a look at a Red Team lateral movement tactics and techniques for Windows systems. So again, this particular video series was designed with Windows in mind, or that was the core operating system that we were targeting. So it's only fair that we end this series by taking a look at a very important tactic in the Red Team lifecycle, which is lateral movement. All right, now in regards to what we will be covering in this video, we'll again get an idea of what lateral movement is, and then we'll move on to the practical section where we will explore various lateral movement techniques, either using PsExec, pass the hash, or we'll take a look at how to use pass the hash, and we'll also take a look at how to authenticate to the target via RDP. That being said, firstly, we need to get an understanding of what lateral movement is. So again, this was the definition from the MITRE website, and again, it tells us that lateral movement consists of techniques that adversaries use to enter and control remote systems on a network. Following through on their primary objective often requires exploring the network to find a target and subsequently gaining access to it. Reaching their objective often involves pivoting through multiple systems and accounts to gain access or further access on the network. Adversaries might install their own remote access tools to accomplish lateral movement, or use legitimate credentials with native network and operating system tools, which may be stealthier. Now we are going to be focusing on this last section here, where adversaries might install their own remote access tools to accomplish lateral movement, or use legitimate credentials with native network and operating system tools, which may be stealthier. Now, the reason we're going to be focusing on utilizing legitimate credentials for lateral movement is primarily because the environment that we have been targeting isn't an Active Directory environment. And again, we are pretty much targeting one system, and of course we may discover other systems as we move along, but we are going to take a look at how to use the legitimate credentials that we were able to gather and utilize them for legitimate authentication with PsExec, and also for the hashes that we were able to gather. I'll also take you through the process of using these password hashes for legitimate authentication. So again, as I said here, our objective is to utilize the clear text and the clear text passwords and the hashes to facilitate lateral movement through legitimate authentication protocols and methods. So it's fairly simple to understand what we're going to be doing here. So when we take a look at the MITRE attack framework and the lateral movement tactic, you can see that we are going to be taking a look at remote services and alternate forms of authentication. Now, the reason why this is so important is primarily because whenever we run an exploit, or whenever we've gained initial access to a target system, we have done so, at least in the case of this video series, by exploiting a particular service or vulnerability, right? And that isn't a legitimate form of authentication. So once we actually explored the credential access tactic, and we're able to dump clear text passwords from memory as well as password hashes, what do we do with these credentials? Well, that's where we can actually use them. So this is these techniques essentially deal with us putting to use these credentials for two main reasons. Number one, we can use them for legitimate authentication, which means we're now going to be utilizing a much more stable stream of control in regards to our target system. So again, we can utilize the credentials to gain access to the target via RDP, which is much more efficient, and it is again legitimate. So we're not going through any covert channels of communicating with the target. Secondly, as to why this is very, very important, is it is much more stealthy, because again, we're not exploiting any service, or we're not we don't have to worry about antivirus detection or evasion. We're using legitimate overt channels of communication and authentication, and then running our code that way. So again, this is a very, very important step in the Red Team lifecycle. That being said, let's actually get started with the practical aspect of this video. So I'll see you back on my Kali VM. Alright, so I'm back on my Kali VM, and I currently have access to the Windows 10 target via a MITRE session, and I haven't elevated my privileges yet, so that's what I'm going to be doing first, and then I'll take you through the workflow we utilized to get the the clear text passwords and the password hashes. So I will just put this in the background, and we will search for bypass UAC. We'll use the same privilege escalation technique. And again, we'll just use this particular module here, the bypass UAC injection WinSXS. We'll set the payload to Windows x64 Meterpreter reverse TCP. And then we want to set the target to Windows x64, right? And then we set the L host to, again, do we need to actually configure that? Let's take a look here. Show options. No, we don't. We already have that configured. And again, I'll leave the default port there. We just need to change the session. So I'm going to say set session 1, and we hit run. And we should be able to have successfully elevated our privileges, right? So again, I'll just let this complete. We'll wait for the we'll wait for this for the module to actually send the stage, and we receive the Meterpreter session. And now we can move on to the next step, right? So if I say get privs, you can see that we've elevated our privileges. So if I can say get UID, it's still telling me the same. So I can load incognito, right? And I will list the tokens. And again, we can then impersonate the anti-authority system token here. So I'll just copy that, and we will again then say impersonate token, and I'll just paste in the token name there, hit enter. That should provide us with anti-authority system privileges. So there we are, get user ID. Fantastic. So now that we've elevated our privileges, we can run commands like hashdump. That'll give us the hashes for all the user accounts on the system. So I can copy them because we will be utilizing them in a few seconds here, and I'll actually keep them right over there. And we also utilized mimikatz, and I'll utilize mimikatz by loading it in Meterpreter using load kiwi. And we were able to identify the clear text passwords by dumping the LSA, or we're essentially dumping secrets from LSA or utilizing LSA. So I can say LSA dump secrets. We hit enter, and you should see that the cached default password right over here is password. So again, this may be for the IE user, which is the default user on the system, or it could be for the administrator. Regardless, we are going to save it here. So we've obtained our clear text password. There we go. And yeah, we pretty much have everything we actually need to perform lateral movement. Now, as I said, we are not going to be focusing on actually pivoting through a network because we're only dealing with one target. We are taking a look at how to use these credentials to authenticate legitimately to the target. So the first access vector or authentication protocol that we're going to try and utilize is RDP. Well, firstly, do we have RDP enabled on the target? Well, we can actually confirm that by opening up a shell session. And again, what we can do is just say netstat ANO, and the default port that Windows utilizes for RDP is 3389. So let's see if it's actually listening on port 3389. We can actually see it is listening on port 3389. And that means that RDP is enabled. However, we can also utilize a Metasploit module. I'll just put this in the background. There we are. And I will search for RDP. Right, and there are various RDP modules that we can utilize. There is also an RDP module that will allow you to enable it or enable RDP. However, it requires administrative privileges. In our case, we have administrative privileges, so it'll actually it won't do anything because we already have it enabled. But if it is disabled, this module will enable it. We also have a few other RDP modules here, as you can see, that will actually check and identify whether RDP is currently running, and that's an auxiliary module. So we can say use and show options, and we then set the R host, which is going to be the target IP, which in this case is 192.168.2.109. And again, I'm just going to hit run. And we will then, again, we can provide the RDP client IP. So again, in this particular case, we can set it to ours. So we can say RDP, RDP client. Let me just say set RDP client, client IP. and we'll set that to the Kali IP, so 192.168.2.21. We hit run, and that will again tell us whether RDP is actually enabled, and you can see detected RDP on the target IP, Windows version 10, etc. And yeah, we can pretty much authenticate or we can actually authenticate to the target via RDP. So the RDP client that I'm going to be using is going to be Remina, and I've already typed in the IP here. So Remina is a remote desktop client for Kali. Kali should come pre-packaged with Remina. So again, just type in the target IP address and the port, and we hit enter. And it's going to ask us for RDP authentication credentials. So let's try and see whether we can actually log in using this password to the administrator account. So I'm just going to copy that, and we'll provide the password there, and we'll hit OK. And let's see whether we can get access to the administrator account. It looks like we've obtained a connection. So there we are. We'll just wait for it to load up, and we should be able to see the graphical user interface. Another user is signed in. If you continue, the other user will be disconnected. No, we don't want to do that, primarily because the current user that is logged on is the current user that's logged on is the IE user, but we can actually do it. And let's see, we might actually lose our interpreter session, but again, let's just try and see whether that works. Administrator, like so, and we'll paste that in there. You can also provide the domain information here. We're going to hit OK, and let's just authenticate. I'm going to say yes, and we're just going to wait for that to actually switch over. So you can see, please wait for MS Edge Win 10 IE user to, I can't see the entire screen here. We can also toggle full screen here, so I'm just going to toggle out of this, and we can also modify various aspects of the RDP session. So again, let me just open up the menu or the configuration page here. Just give that a second. Hopefully we're able to get the session on the target system here. I'm just going to open that up. So I'm just going to wait for this to actually connect, and we can see that we have access here. So it's just going to take a few seconds to start up. And looks like the start menu is opening up there, and yeah, the connection might be a bit slow, but that's primarily an issue with my internet connection. And we have access to the administrator account, as you can see here. I'll click on that there, and we should have access to the admin account. So yeah, we pretty much have been able to authenticate to the client via RDP, and as you can see, we don't require any Metasploit modules. We're not exploiting anything. We just have access through legitimate credentials, right, that we were able to get. So yeah, I'm just going to terminate the RDP session here, and we can now take a look at how to utilize PsExec with this particular password, and I'll actually have to switch over to my Windows client and show you how that works, right? So just give me a few seconds to switch over to my Windows client. Alright, so I'm back on my Windows client, and I'm currently on the sysinternals page, and you can see the PsExec tool. So this is a legitimate Windows utility, and I'll just give you a basic introduction as to what it is used for, right? So it says utilities like Telnet and remote control programs like Symantec's PC Anywhere let you execute programs on remote systems, but they can be a pain to set up and require that you install client software on the remote systems that you wish to access. PsExec is a lightweight telnet replacement that lets you execute processes on other systems, complete with full interactivity for console applications without having to manually install client software. PsExec's most powerful uses include launching interactive command prompts on remote systems and remote enabling tools like ipconfig that otherwise do not have the ability to show information about remote systems. So again, what we need to do is just download it. I already have it downloaded, and I'm just going to switch over to my downloads directory with my command prompt. So I'm just going to open up my command prompt, and I'll head over into downloads. Sorry, let's just switch over to downloads. There we go. And I'm just going to enlarge this so that you can actually see what's going on. So I'll increase the font size here, and I'll just maximize that, and we can actually get started with the process here. So I'll just navigate into the PS Tools directory, and again, you need to unzip the archive once you've downloaded it. And within this particular folder, you're going to have the PsExec executable and PsExec 64-bit. So again, based on your target architecture, you can use either one of them. In our case, our target system is running a 64-bit version of Windows, so we can utilize PsExec 64.exe. All right, so again, we already have legitimate credentials, and we can utilize PsExec for lateral movement by spawning a command prompt legitimately by connecting to the target system with the credentials that we received, and then we can utilize that shell to do anything that we might have done with Meterpreter or a standard command shell, right? So to do this, what we want to do is we can actually just say, I'll just say PsExec, so I'll execute, and I'll say PsExec.exe 64.exe. I now need to provide the IP address of the target system. In this case, it's going to be 192.168.2.109. I then provide the username, which is going to be administrator, and then the password, which in this case was password with a 0 and an exclamation mark. And then you specify the command that you want to execute on the target system. So for example, I can say ipconfig. I'm going to hit enter, and for some reason it's giving us an error here. Let's see where we're getting the error. So it's going to say that the right, so I'm just going to just go back over here, and we're just going to get rid of that. So PsExec 64.exe, and we'll just launch we'll just repeat the commands here. Alternatively, you can also utilize it with PowerShell. It makes it much easier. So we'll say user is administrator, and the password is going to be password, and we then say ipconfig. Hit enter, and it's going to say starting PsExec SVC on the target. So you want to give that a few seconds, and it should actually provide the output of the ipconfig command. Alright, so as you can see here, it actually connected successfully, and it provided the output of the command that we set up. And we can confirm that this is the target because the IPv4 address displayed from the ipconfig command tells us that the IP of that target is 192.168.2.109. So if we want to spawn a shell, we can essentially just say, instead of ipconfig, we want to run cmd.exe. And again, it's going to give us access to the administrator account via a command prompt. So I'm going to hit enter. It's going to say starting the PsExec SVC service on the target IP. So again, give that a few seconds. And I'm just going to wait for that to actually start up. All right, there we go. We actually got a command prompt session on the spawned on the target, and you can see it's currently within the Windows System 32 directory. So if I say who am I, you can see MS Edge Win 10 administrator, and now I pretty much have access to the target system via legitimate command prompt, and I authenticated with legitimate credentials. So now if I was in an Active Directory environment, or I had other PCs connected to the network, I could again start pinging the entire network subnet to discover systems on the network, and then pivot to those systems, so on and so forth. So I can pretty much do anything now. So for example, net user, I can add other user accounts, I can delete them, I can make changes to the system. I pretty much have total control over the system. And as I said, you can then utilize this command prompt to actually again start finding other systems on the network, and then pivot onto those systems and make your way to the target system that you actually wanted to compromise. That being said, that's pretty much how to utilize the PsExec command, or the utility for legitimate authentication, or rather for lateral movement, if you will. Now that we have actually taken a look at the various methods that we can actually utilize for legitimate authentication with our clear text credentials, let's take a look at another scenario where you don't have access to any clear text passwords, but you have the password hashes. Right, so how do we use the password hashes for authentication? So I'm going to switch back over to my Windows, or sorry, to my Kali VM. All right, so I'm back on my Kali VM, and again, we're going to use the scenario where I only have the password hashes. So how would we go about utilizing these hashes for legitimate authentication to either spawn a shell or to in some way authenticate with the target? Well, the way we can actually facilitate that is through the pass the hash technique, right? So the pass the hash technique is fairly simple to understand. All it involves is essentially authenticating with the target using a hash. And you might be asking yourself, well, can we actually do that? Well, we can actually do that using SMB, right? Or through the SMB protocol. So Metasploit actually has a very helpful module that allows us to do this, and it actually will provide us with a Meterpreter session. And again, I'll actually show this to you. So I'm just going to put this in the background. So put this in the background here. And if I list out my sessions, you can see that we have the 2 sessions here, and one of them is privileged. And what we can do is just search for PsExec, right? And again, just bear with me and I'll show you what I'm talking about. So there we are. You can see exploit Windows SMB PsExec. That is the module we want to use, and it actually utilizes PsExec, but in this case we're utilizing a hash. So you can see the description is fairly it actually tells you about what's happening here. So Microsoft Windows authentication, user utility, right? Or user code execution in this case. So what we can do is just say use, paste in the module name. We can set our payload. Our target is a 64-bit system. So Windows x64 Meterpreter reverse TCP. We then say show options here. And we want to set the L port because we already have that one running. So we'll set it to 4443. And now for the options, you can see we need to set the target IP here. The port is already configured correctly. That's SMB. SMB is always active on Windows unless explicitly disabled. We then need to set the SMB domain if there is one. In our case, we don't have a domain. We can then set the SMB password and the SMB user. Right now, in terms of the password, we can provide the password, the clear text password, or the password hash. And I'll actually show this to you. So I'll set the SMB user first. So I'll say SMB user. And we will set it to administrator, right? We hit enter and then we copy the password hash. Now, in terms of the password hash, we only want to copy these 2 pieces of, or these 2 strings rather, which make up the NTLM hash. And we want to exclude all the rest of the content. And then we want to say set SMB pass, right? And then we paste in the hash there. And then we set the target IP, which is our hosts 192.168.2.109. We hit run and give that a few seconds. There we are, authenticating, selecting the PowerShell target, executing the payload, and voila, we get a Meterpreter session. And in this case, if we type in get UID, entity authority system, so a fully privileged Meterpreter session. And again, that is how to authenticate legitimately using a password hash. So regardless of what credentials you've been able to gather, they could be clear text, they could be password hashes. You can utilize all of these credentials for lateral movement. And as I said, again, we have a legitimate session on the target, and we've taken a look at how to authenticate with RDP, and also how to authenticate with PsExec or the PsExec utility, which is very, very helpful as you've just seen. And also how to utilize password hashes here with the Windows SMB PsExec module on Metasploit. That is pretty much all that I wanted to cover in this video. As I said, this was an introductory course to red team operations, primarily on Windows systems. We also took a look at various evasion techniques on Linux, because that is quite important. I will be making more series or more red team series that will be focused on advanced Windows environments like Active Directory, so that we can take a look at how to utilize other tools and techniques to make our way through the system. And then of course, I will also be covering the other tactics that I haven't covered in this series, like exfiltration, so on and so forth. Thank you very much for watching this series. I would love to hear your feedback. You can contact me on Twitter. My username is Hackersploit. I would also like to say, or I would like to provide or give a huge shout out and thank you to Linode for making this series possible. They're really doing a lot in the cybersecurity industry and providing users like yourself with free training again, so that you can improve your skill sets and helping make the digital IT industry more cybersecurity aware. So I just wanted to say thank you very much to Linode, and thank you very much for going through this series if you've made it this far. Thank you, and I will be seeing you in the next series.